Chapter 16. They serve steamed hay in jail.
We get paid?
After Gloom confirmed to Prey that yes, they did indeed get paid, and Taffy had stopped giving him a suitably horrified look, they finally managed to complete all the required paperwork. Or rather, Gloom did. Crimson and Prey just waited for him to finish. Once that was done, they were off out the door with a cheery goodbye from Taffy Hopes, as well as a promise to get Prey a piece of toffee because apparently he was living a deprived childhood, and on towards the next appointment of the day, Quartermaster Carrot's storehouse.
It fits you well. You were born to a life in the night guard.
Gloom congratulated Crimson. Thank you, sir. It fits because I know my job and I got the correct size, Carrot told them flatly. Crimson was wearing a full suit of repurposed Royal Guard armor. They'd come to pick up Crimson's armored set, despite Gloom's earlier assumption that they wouldn't have enough time today. It did indeed seem to suit Crimson. The way he wore the armor looked natural, like he was wearing a coat rather than a solid sheet of lightly enchanted metal.
It's a bit strange seeing you in gray, but you're a proper night guard now,
Gloom commented, ignoring the Quartermaster's burlesque manner. Gloom was referring to the armor enchantments changing Crimson's coat color to match the uniform gray of the rest of the night guard. The only real difference between Crimson's current appearance and the average night guard, not counting the wings, was that his lanky mane still hung loose. All the other Thestrals Prey had seen wore theirs tied or braided back, but none had a close-cropped version like the Royal Guards. Prey himself was once again sulking around at the back of the room, avoiding Carrot's notice. Whenever the Quartermaster turned one way, Prey would go the other, keeping out of his line of sight. Prey was willing to bet the Quartermaster still hated him from last time. It would have been an easy bet, too. Still got that bucking woolsack trailing around. It was understandable. Prey would have hated Prey if he was in Carrot's place. What he'd said last time was still hanging around in the back of everyone's mind now that they were all present in the same room again. One set of medium, Pegasus size 7, Martian spades make. So in this, Carrot ordered gruffly, shoving a sheaf of forms at Crimson. If you want the armor, that is. Or don't sign. It's no skin off my nose what you little pansies do. Crimson took the papers without comment and began to methodically sign through them. You join the guard, you get a set of armor. You leave the guard, or it gets recalled, you give back the set of armor. If it's dirty or rusted, you pay to fix it. You lose a piece, you pay to replace it. You damage or break it outside the line of duty, you pay for it. If I don't like the set you return to me, you guessed it, you pay for it. Understand? Carrot growled. Yes, sir, Crimson answered flatly. Good. Don't let the door hit your flank on the way out, Carrot said, already walking back to behind the counter flap. Gloom thought some rather uncharitable things at the Quartermaster's back, before remembering and berating himself for being so uncharitable towards a old war veteran. From there, they went back up through the palace and along the winding corridors. Prey much preferred the slower pace Gloom set indoors as opposed to out on Canterlot streets. Even if he hated the palace, at least he could keep up in here. Crimson took the opportunity while they trotted to fiddle with the last few adjustments of his armor, testing his range of motion. Gloom offered him a few helpful pointers of his own.
That backstrap is one that you'll always end up chafing. You want to put some padding around the buckle tonight.
Thank you for the advice, sir.
Welcome. It also might be a good idea to tie your forelock and mane back so it doesn't obscure your vision or get caught in the joints, Gloom added, nodding towards what Prey had noticed earlier.
The helmet isn't all that it could be,
Prey observed, mostly to himself. Apparently, though, for once, their less superior ears caught his words.
What makes you say that?
Gloom asked, not out of any real interest, but just as something to say as they walked.
Oh, I just meant that it's not great. It doesn't even have a chin strap to keep it on in a fight,
Prey replied with a shrug. It fits snugly. It should not come off, Crimson said.
Maybe, but it does leave you very open to someone slitting your throat deep enough to hit an artery.
When they both looked askance at him, Prey brought a hoof to his neck.
No armor guarding your throat, see?
He pointed out. They would need to get close enough and overpower me first, Crimson stated.
Maybe the new night guard armor will account for that. When we finally get it,
Gloom said, adding his 2 bits. Prey shrugged again.
It was just an observation,
he said.
All right, morbid observations about cutting throats over. Let's get all this pinned up and sorted before the end of the day shift. I want to make some real headway on the train land case,
Gloom said, pushing open the ISND's office door as they arrived back.
Someone's been in here,
Prey said the moment they entered.
Some pony,
Gloom corrected automatically before his ears caught up with the rest of Prey's words.
What was that?
Someone's been in here while we were gone,
Prey repeated. Crimson took a deep sniff, turning his head this way and that like he was scenting the air. Can't tell. Too much else in here. Sorry, he said, shrugging his wings.
How do you know that, Prey? Gloom asked. It's a guard division's office. There's plenty of ponies authorized to enter in here.
I don't know who they were. I just said someone's been in here,
Prey stated.
Look, some of the pages have been disturbed over there on the floor, he added.
Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything.
And someone's put a new file on your desk,
Prey finished. Oh, well, would you look at that?
Gloom said, trotting over and picking up the brown paper folder. Personally, Prey wouldn't have picked it up before checking the folder for contact-based poisons or magical traps. Gloom flicked the folder open and began reading what it contained. He groaned. Sir? Crimson asked.
Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be?
Gloom muttered to himself, discarding the folder and rubbing at his eyes.
There's been another minor riot, this time in the town of Haysteam. Here, take a look, he said, tiredly flipping the folder around and pushing it towards them.
Prey hopped up and managed to catch the edge of the desk, getting enough leverage to pull himself up.
Let me take a look. Don't touch me!
That last was almost snarled at Crimson, who moved towards as if to give Prey a boost up. Crimson raised a hoof placatingly and simply stepped to the side so he could see what was in the folder too. Prey kept one eye on the newly grayed-out Pegasus as he pulled out the pages, using only the tips of his cloven hooves to touch the paper. It still hadn't been checked for poison yet. Healthy paranoia kept you alive. The first page was a section from the newspaper article, with a large headline shouting, "Third brawl in as many months! Mayor misguided?" Under it, there was a black and white photo shot of a crowded dirt street, with about 20 ponies swinging away at one another atop a number of overturned carts. What immediately caught Prey's eye was the newspaper's date.
It's dated today. That was some fast work getting it to us by, Private Stained Glass in the Records Department,
Prey said, reading the name off the cover of the submitted report.
It appears this brawl happened yesterday, and we're seeing it today in local paper from Haysteam, he finished.
Unusual for the Records Department to give us so much at the time of day,
Gloom thought, before shaking his head and putting that aside for now.
This is a problem, and I don't mean the riot, although Luna knows that's serious enough. It's that this doesn't fit with your model, Prey. It isn't on the next railroad track from the last riot. It's further back on the loop,
Gloom observed gloomily. What does the paper say, sir? Crimson asked.
Oh, list of damages, like smashed glass and knocked down telegraph poles, along with the usual rubbish mixed in with light sprinkling of truth. Have a read yourself,
Gloom sighed, pushing the newspaper article over to Crimson.
So, newspapers are highly inaccurate?
Prey asked. He'd never seen a newspaper before today, so didn't know how factual they actually were. His home village had been too far away from anywhere to receive them. Actually, he didn't know if newspapers had even been around back then. Shame. Looked like they had made good fire kindling.
Never trust a newspaper, Prey. At best, they only ever give you one side of the story, and quite often overestimate the facts. Some papers are better than others, the Canterlot Express, for example. However, some tabloids just entirely make up sensational lies, Gloom grumbled.
Yet it's actively read by a large majority of the population?
Prey asked, raising an eyebrow.
Yeah, sort of. Some ponies take it more seriously than others, Gloom answered.
Still sounds like it's useful in gauging public opinion, and can be used to see what the most restless individuals in society have to say. Many ponies will just follow the herd by the sound of it,
Prey said. Gloom paused to think about that for a moment.
Well, when you put it that way, Prey, you make me wonder why I get out of bed in the evening, he sighed.
The brawl started over crashed carts, it says here, sir. That can't be all it was, Crimson said, reading over the article.
Most likely it isn't. It must have been simmering under the surface for a while, some hidden factor of feud,
Prey told him.
Prey is probably right, but this doesn't answer the question of why it didn't fit with the prediction. I thought you were onto something there, Prey,
Gloom said, disappointed. Prey sat back on the desk, idly rubbing his good ear while he thought.
Perhaps this riot was just an exception to the pattern, leftover tensions from the previous fight. Or maybe our instigator decided to shake up their circuit a bit, realizing they were becoming too predictable, he said thoughtfully.
It would be good if we knew what the real reason for the fight was, Crimson said, putting the paper down and blowing a long strand of mane out of his eyes, which had been taped down awkwardly by the new addition of his helmet.
No, it most likely won't tell us anything, aside from why they fought. It wouldn't answer the question of who is getting them to fight,
Prey told him. Crimson blinked slowly, then looked back to their sergeant who was supposed to be in charge here. How should we proceed then, sir? He asked.
Horse apples,
Gloom thought.
Well, perhaps the best way to proceed is to go to Haysteam ourselves and find out what really happened,
Gloom said, sounding a lot more sure of himself than his thoughts let on.
What if we don't find anything, though?
You would let us out of Counterlot?
Prey asked slowly.
We would be going together as a unit,
Gloom said, his thoughts already running into logistics for the trip.
Need tickets, no chariot, Prey can't fly, an amulet too.
You would trust us?
Prey clarified. Gloom quickly sat up straighter and looked Prey in the eye.
We would be going as a unit, he repeated seriously. And this isn't to insult either of you, but it doesn't matter if I trust you or not, because you have those on,
he said, tapping his shin to show where the golden set of bands sat on Prey and Crimson's own forelegs.
You must have figured out that those act as tracking spells,
Gloom said, sounding apologetic but uncompromising.
We're the Night Guard. I expect every pony on the best behavior out there,
he told them. Prey just shrugged and nodded, because everything Gloom said he'd already known. The only reason he brought it up was to try and use reverse psychology to make Gloom trust him more. If he'd agreed too eagerly to get out of Counterlot, it would be suspicious. But by carefully pointing out the fact that he was a probationary prisoner, Prey was showing Gloom that he was trying to work with, rather than against, the sergeant. Crimson, on the other hoof, although his face didn't change, looked like he wasn't pleased by Prey's insinuation that they might not be trusted. It was in the way he shifted his wings.
Are you sure this isn't something the Royal Guard would be better tasked with? No one out there likes the Night Guard,
Prey pointed out. He already knew what Gloom was going to answer.
It's no pony. They're all busy trying to find Rocky Bed. Rescuing him takes priority. We will go instead. Night Guards don't only work at night. We're all guards every other hour of the day also, and our duty remains the same,
Gloom said, pushing himself to his hooves. That was almost exactly what Prey predicted the sergeant would say. Gloom and Crimson were too honor-bound to even consider putting this off. That suited Prey just fine for once. He would be happy to get out of Counterlot.
We're going to the lieutenant's office to inform him that we're going, and there's something I need to grab. But then we're out of here. Come on,
Gloom said, heading for the door. Prey swung himself off the desk and followed Crimson after Gloom. He spared a glance for the office as they left. The corkboards were still bare and files still scattered everywhere. They'd merely made a start.
From one thing straight to the next,
he thought, and then hurried to catch up. The train was already pulling out of the station before they even found their seats. Prey collapsed onto the seat in exhaustion, breathing hard. It had been a hard run. For him. Gloom and Crimson had found it no more stressful than a brisk trot through the scenic streets of Counterlot. Outside, the click-clack on the train tracks steadily increased in rhythm as the train gained speed.
The offer to carry you is still open, Gloom said.
Don't touch me,
Prey gasped, still catching his breath.
Feel free to take a nap if you're tired. It's at least a 45-minute ride to Haysteam,
Gloom suggested, settling back into his own seat. Despite it only being about 3:30 in the afternoon, there was almost no one else on their carriage, just another 5 ponies, sitting far away from the ISND's position. Prey caught a couple of uneasy looks in Gloom's direction. Interestingly enough, the tickets had been half price. Something about the train company having a deal with the guard for guards traveling when on duty. Prey was confident that if Gloom pushed, the nervous mare behind the counter would have given him the tickets for free just to get the intimidating Thestral out of the ticket office. Not that the tickets were coming out of Gloom's pockets, night guard expenses and all that.
You fine over there?
Gloom asked, raising an eyebrow.
Fine,
Prey responded, resting his legs. He was glad to finally have the chance to sit down and rest his sore hooves after running everywhere. The hard cobbles of Counterlot streets had been merciless.
Perhaps we should get you some horseshoes. Could probably get a farrier to resize a full set for you, Gloom suggested.
Idiot,
Prey thought. He wordlessly lifted one cloven hoof with a flat expression, bottom facing out so Gloom could clearly see the cleft in it.
Oops, didn't think about that. Cloven hooves and all,
Gloom muttered, rubbing at his chest. Crimson cleared his throat. What are the regulations on horseshoes in the Night Guard? He asked. Gloom held up his own hoof, showing them the fairly thin and nondescript horseshoe nailed to the bottom of it. It didn't have a lip or indent. It was just a flat semicircle of metal. It hadn't shown obviously when he walked, but it had been easy enough to hear when he trotted across any hard surface.
Almost any permanent kind is fine, apart from studded horseshoes like you sometimes see in rural ponies wearing. Hammer hooves and horseshoes are a bit different, as we can take those on and off, but those are only permitted when some pony is headed into an active conflict zone, like monster detainment, Gloom said.
And yet another fine example of pony biology being superior to sheep's,
Prey observed, rotating his hoof this way and that as he examined it. Having cloven hooves, sheep could not have horseshoes, which was quite inconvenient if you spent a lot of time traveling across rough terrain or, alternatively, cobblestone streets. There was a slight upside. Cloven hooves did provide some slight advantage in being able to grip small objects between the cleft, like a quill, for example. I have not needed shoes before. Is it necessary in the night guard? Crimson questioned, tufted ears flicking for a moment as the train's wheels made a particularly loud clink.
They're not a requirement, but personally, I would highly recommend that when you get your first paycheck, we get you some. A good set of horseshoes goes a long way, and it certainly lends some extra weight if you ever get in a fight, Gloom said.
I am afraid hoof to hoof is not my strong suit. I am a passable. I was trained with wing blades and in the use of my wings, Crimson said.
Don't sell yourself short. I know you're more than passable. However, you need to remember, even after you get your father's wings blade back, I don't want you using them if we can help it. We are part of the guard. We maintain the peace, not maim or kill ponies. And wing blades aren't made for subduing,
Gloom said. In Prey's opinion, that was the best option to neutralize a threat, but ponies didn't see things that way. Which was probably why he was still alive. They'd captured him in a trap he was dumb enough, or rather desperate enough, to fall for. He still wasn't sure why, but rather than execute him, they'd thrown him in Dreverton to rot. Perhaps it was spitefulness. Perhaps it was because he hadn't been able to fight back. The reasons didn't really matter in the end. If not for an error in Prey's record, Captain Valor would never have fetched him from that dark hole. For some reason, they hadn't known he was a murderer, just a dark mind magic user. Sunshine had admitted as much. Prey still hadn't a clue how that had happened. But after 57 years, someone messing up filing a single sheet of paperwork was pretty understandable. After all, the Resistance's war had been 57 years ago. There was no way a lamb was alive 57 years ago.
Except this little runt lamb.
What about weight, sir? Crimson asked, and Prey recalled himself to the conversation. Horseshoes are heavy, and I am not used to wearing any. It would throw off my fight. Crimson didn't sound like he was protesting, merely setting out his concerns.
Cloudsteel,
Gloom answered, holding up his shod hoof again with a grin.
Made in Cloudsdale on a Thunderforge. They barely weigh a thing, and are tougher than normal steel, last longer, and are even resistant to some types of magic. Not cheap, but well worth the investment.
Crimson considered for a moment, before giving a sharp nod. Yes, sir. You are quite correct. I will obtain a pair at the earliest opportunity.
Hey, it wasn't an order. I was just making a recommendation as a friend, not as an officer. It's still your own choice to make, Gloom said quickly. I didn't make that sound like an order, did I?
I have. I will follow your advice and obtain a set of Cloudsteel shoes, Crimson said resolutely.
What other properties does Cloudsteel have?
Prey asked, joining in on the only interesting bit of the conversation.
Thunderforging implies it involves a process only available to Pegasi, or possibly unicorns. Cloudsteel would therefore be a commodity metal, much in demand to certain buyers,
he reasoned.
I don't know much about what Cloudsteel actually does or how it's made. Sorry. The Thurstal clans only knew of it. We didn't know how to make it. And since we're trying to avoid detection...
Gloom trailed off with a shrug.
You're right about it being quite expensive, though. Why are you interested? Planning on starting a monopoly and bankrolling Cloudsdale? He joked.
Prey didn't even bother formulating a reply to his ridiculous suggestion. The economy would never be decided on the forging process of some rare but ultimately substitutable metal. That said, he was still interested in its potential uses. It was frustrating that Gloom didn't know anything further. Oh well, he'd have to find out later for himself.
What are you thinking about in that big brain of yours, Prey?
Gloom asked the lamb, stretching out languidly on his seat.
Nothing. Just considering if our sergeant actually has a plan. So far, all I've been told is, go to Haysteam, sir.
He finished with a click of teeth and his patronizing smile. Gloom actually grinned back, which made Prey scowl and made Gloom's grin increase in width.
Yes, your sergeant does indeed have a plan.
You're going to walk into the sheriff's office, pull rank, and question the rioters. Then we're going to snoop around and hope to find something of note before we get back on the train and return to Canterlot. How close am I, sir?
Prey asked sweetly. Gloom closed his mouth. Can he read my thoughts? He gave Prey a critical look. Prey just kept on smiling. Something like that, Prey muttered with a sigh. Is there a plan to make them actually listen to you, sir? They don't like the Night Guard or Thestrals, sir, Crimson put in rather needlessly.
Not true. They don't like me, the Thestral. They shouldn't have anything against the Night Guard, so I'm just going to be a normal Night Guard.
Gloom's mouth quirked up. With this, he finished before they could ask, pulling out a small brown pouch, which was what he'd picked up from the lieutenant before they'd left. Gloom pulled the drawstring open and shook out what was inside onto his hoof. A pendant fell out, made up of a silver star engraved with a stylized eye. Prey's droopy ears twitched in sudden interest. He could tell the amulet was enchanted. He stared intently at it as he tried to analyze just what it did.
Either of you know what this is?
Gloom asked, holding it up by the loop of string. No, sir, Crimson answered.
Really? Well, it's called a dusk pony amulet. They used to be a closely guarded treasure, but thankfully after the clans reunited with Equestria, we've had unicorns to make them again. What a dusk pony amulet does is that
has an illusionary-based enchantment on it that conceals your thestral traits somehow.
Prey interrupted once again, eyes still locked on the dangling amulet as he tilted his head so as to be able to examine it better.
They must have been used by a few thestrals from within each clan, tasked with infiltrating regular pony society now and then to try and keep abreast of developments.
Prey blinked. He hadn't really meant to say all of that out loud, as it had only been a theory, but from Gloom's thoughts, he saw that his deduction had been accurate.
Are you sure you haven't seen one of those before, Prey? Gloom asked.
Quite sure.
Then did you figure all that just by looking at it?
Gloom asked, sounding slightly impressed.
Only partly. It was simply made the most sense and explained how the Thestrals don't seem as disjointed from society as I was otherwise expecting after 1,000 years of separation. It wasn't hard to figure out,
Prey answered, deflecting most of the accomplishment. He glanced towards Crimson.
It would also explain why he doesn't recognize it, mainly being an outcast within his own clan,
Prey stated. Then he added,
sorry,
to Crimson. He wasn't sure why he'd bothered apologizing. It wasn't his problem how Crimson's clan had treated him. And if he took offense at Prey's observation, then that was his problem. That explanation makes sense to me, Crimson said calmly. Seems he hadn't taken offense.
Well done, Prey. That's quite something to be able to figure out a clan's ancestral secrets within only a few seconds, Gloom said with a light chuckle.
Were you taught how to analyze magical items, Prey? Crimson asked, yellow eyes regarding Prey speculatively.
No, I just have a knack for figuring things out. It's nothing special,
Prey answered, looking out the window and deflecting their curiosity.
Hey, it was a compliment. That's going to be quite a useful knack to have. Maybe even your cutie mark, if, you were a pony, Gloom added.
But I was born a runt sheep freak instead. Fate is cruel, no?
Prey responded with a lopsided grin. He didn't let the bubbling hate he felt for pony kind bleed into his tone. Gloom chuckled at what he thought was a joke, and with a quick glance to his sergeant, Crimson attempted to follow his lead, trying to pull off what was supposed to be an amused smile. It just looked creepy.
We're going to have to work on that, Gloom thought with a small grimace. Oh well, at least it was an honest effort.
Crimson seemed to become aware that he'd fumbled the initiative, and hastily let the smile fade, his wings shuffling slightly on his back.
Well, try it on then,
Prey said to Gloom, drawing their attention back to the amulet he still held.
There's no hurry, but if you want to see what it looks like.
Gloom pulled off his helmet and slipped the amulet over his neck, letting it come to a rest with a slight clink against his chest plate.
Not bad, eh?
He asked. The amulet glowed a deep blue for a second. Then a ripple of magic raced over Gloom's frame, completing the circuit of his body within a second. The magic left Gloom mostly the same aside from a few key points. He was still a gray, armor-wearing night guard, but the pharaoh-looking slit eyes had been replaced with normal-looking pony eyes, although still yellow, and his bat wings now appeared to be just a Pegasus wings. You look like one of them. Pardon. I mean, a Pegasus, sir, Crimson said. Then, after a further moment of examination, your eyes are like mine now, he added, sounding vaguely surprised.
Quite a useful little trick, isn't it?
Gloom said, giving the amulet a small flick. Prey was observing the illusionary disguise closely, and, not to his surprise, found it didn't hold up under close scrutiny. That was the case with most illusions, especially those bound to a living or moving form. Gloom's new eyes didn't react quite the same way a natural one's did to light stimuli, or when he blinked. But otherwise, unless you were either very observant or looking for it, you wouldn't notice. The wings had their own slight visual problem, which was that the feathers were too similar, almost perfect copies of each other rather than having the small imperfections or slight variations a normal wing would possess. Again, not something anyone would notice at a passing glance, but Prey imagined that if Gloom tried to fly, the illusion would become clearly apparent to all. Overall, though, it was a decently constructed illusionary glamour.
How does it hold up under contact? Does it dissipate, give the perception of touch, or simply allow someone's hoof to pass through?
Prey questioned.
Well, the shell is almost skin tight, so no putty should notice. But if you mean what happens when you touch it, why don't you see for yourself?
Gloom offered, extending one wing towards Prey for him to test. Prey shrunk away with a look of disgust.
No thank you.
I'm perfectly fine to just observe the effect, he answered. He didn't want to risk dispelling the illusion by accident and then finding out about the runes on his hooves. True to his previous predictions, the wing didn't behave like a normal one should. The feathers didn't flex or shift in the air as the wing was extended.
You'll have to keep your wings closed if you don't want anyone to notice it's fake, sir,
he told Gloom.
It's a fault I'm already aware of. You're not the first to notice a Dust Pony amulet's weakness, but you were rather quick on the uptake, Gloom said.
Prey wondered for a moment if he should point out the other problem, which was that Gloom had just put the amulet on in full view of the other ponies in the carriage, which kind of defeated the purpose of a glamour. Not that he thought the 5 ponies down the other end of the carriage would be saying anything. Prey decided he would save his breath and instead went back to looking out the window at the passing scenery of scattered farms and grassy plains. Thankfully, the other 2 were also content to let the rest of the journey pass in peace. Crimson spent it familiarizing himself with every inch of his new armor, checking and rechecking all of its joints and buckles. Gloom appeared to be catching up with his disturbed sleep schedule and had his head down, lightly dozing when the train pulled up to the platform with a shrill whistle and loud hiss of steam. Through the window, Prey got a quick look at the small train station and, beyond that, the start of the town. "Haysteam! This stop Haysteam!" the conductor yelled from somewhere outside.
Come on, Prey.
Crimson and Gloom were already on their hooves and stepping out into the aisle. Prey took another look out the window and then followed them. Jumping across the gap and down onto the platform brought a small wince to his face, as his hooves reminded him that they were still upset about their last jaunt through Canterlot. "Which way to the town sheriff's office, sir?" Crimson asked as they stepped away from the train. They'd exited near the far end of the platform, and they were relatively separated from the rest of the ponies climbing on and off the train. Gloom shaded his eyes and looked around the platform and up one street they had a clear vision of, but didn't spot anything helpful in locating the local lockup.
Crimson, fly up and have a look for the sheriff's office, would ya? I would myself, but,
He flicked the amulet again.
Would give myself away. I'll stay with Prey, Gloom said.
"Yes, sir. This should only take a minute," Crimson answered, starting to back up so he could get a quick running start.
The jail should have a sign or something. Look for that,
Gloom told him, looking back over his shoulder as the train let out a shrill whistle and started to slowly chug away. Crimson flexed out his wings, spreading his impressively large pinions wide. Then, with a spring and a few powerful flaps, Crimson was airborne and rapidly gaining altitude. Prey had snapped his eyes shut as Crimson took off to avoid any dust kicked up by the downdraft. He'd been unlucky enough to be blinded a few times before when standing too close to a griffin, taking off in the resistance. It was an annoying hazard of flyers. He cautiously reopened his eyes enough to squint around, and, seeing no floating dust, opened them fully. Looking up to track Crimson's flight as the now gray Pegasus tilted in the air and began a sweeping glide over the town. It didn't bother Prey to admit that, even from this short demonstration, he thought Crimson was quite an impressive flyer. He wasn't an expert, but the Pegasus's form looked good and he was managing a fair pace despite being weighed down with his new armor.
You ever been flying before?
Gloom asked, seeing his observation of the distant figure of Crimson, and squinting his own yellow eyes against the sun to join him watching. Prey looked at Gloom flatly, then turned his head so he could look over his wingless back.
What do you think, sir?
No, I mean, has anyone ever taken you up before? You're certainly small enough to be a passenger,
Gloom said, then winced slightly.
I didn't mean it like that, he hurriedly added.
That's of no consequence. I'm a runt. While I do not appreciate being treated like a child, it would be pointless to deny my small stature. As long as people don't keep equating one with the other, I don't have a problem,
Prey informed Gloom matter-of-factly. It looked like the figure of Crimson had reached the far side of Haysteam and was starting to return sweep.
So, has anyone ever taken you up?
Gloom asked again after a few long seconds of digesting that. Prey thought about the trip he'd taken in the Sky Chariot when the Solar Guard had retrieved him from Dreverton.
Yes, once.
Did you like it?
Gloom asked, cocking his head.
No.
Don't like heights?
Gloom asked.
No.
Prey repeated, choosing the answer that would be most likely to ensure Gloom never make the offer himself, and also hopefully drop the question.
Who took you? A Pegasus from the local weather team?
Gloom asked Prey, obviously not catching the hint and just trying to make conversation.
There were no weather teams where I was from,
Prey answered.
What? No weather teams? Where did you live?
Gloom asked, now in interest. Everyone Equestria at least has access to a weather team, or even just local Pegasi, he thought. Prey gave the disguised Thestral a sideways look, before refocusing on Crimson as he came into land.
I doubt you would have heard of it. It's just a tiny little village out in the middle of nowhere. Nobody goes there anymore. It's a nowhere-nothing place,
he told Gloom. He wasn't even lying. Crimson swooped in and came to a stop in mid-air, flaring his wings and giving a couple of downward beats as he killed all momentum, before letting himself drop the last bit onto the platform with a clop. Prey reopened his eyes when his ears picked that up, and so was in time to see Crimson point off down the main street. The building I assume to be the sheriff's office is down that way and on the fourth left, sir. It's not a big town, Crimson reported, taking a moment to carefully refold his wings.
Excellent. Well, we're not solving anything by standing here. Let's go,
Gloom said, and started off at a brisk trot. Prey sighed and tried to keep up. Now that they were actually heading through the streets of Haysteam, the ponies' residents had no choice but to notice them. The ponies they passed all moved out of their way, some with hesitant curiosity, some with mild confusion as to who these non-standard-looking royal guards were, and some just tried to avoid eye contact altogether. Prey listened in to the reactions of those who passed within his mental perception range, but didn't pick up anything too important. The guard finally come to put a stop to all these fights? Oh, I hope Blossom doesn't get in trouble with them because of the riot yesterday.
Gray? Grandpa always told me they were white or brown-coated, not gray.
Only two?
What use is that?
Misty won't be fazed by only 2 royal guards.
Baby sheep? Where are they taking a little filly like her? Prey took note of a slightly familiar-looking area coming up on the street where some ponies were clearing up a mess strewn across the street. It reminded him of the photo from the newspaper, the damaged shop fronts, smashed bins, and broken planking they passed, along the deep gouges in the hard-picked dirt of the street outside the same shops, quite clearly indicated where the overturned wagons and riot had happened yesterday. Many of these ponies are acting guilty, sir, Crimson said quietly.
And why wouldn't they? There's been a riot, and it's not even the first one. I'm willing to bet every pony knows some pony who was involved. They feel guilty by association, if nothing else,
Gloom explained, ears flicking as he scanned the faces they passed. He was alert, but not tense. Soon, they reached the correct street and turned off the main street, passing 2 wooden planking houses with brightly painted doors that seemed to be the standard design for almost all of the houses and shops in Haysteam they'd seen so far. The town still had the feeling of being new, a bit hurried and unsure of itself. Prey recalled from the report that it had been built 7 years ago. There were signs that someone, most likely the mayor, had made efforts to try and establish the town proper, like the smattering of new-looking gem-lit street lamps, street signs that still had all their paint, and a couple of oak saplings planted at street corners, still tied up to their guidance posts. Prey decided that he despised Haysteam. Here it is, sir, Crimson said. They had come up to a building with a hanging sign of a painted gold star, and the words County Law underneath. The building was starkly different from the rest of the town, insofar that it was made of red brick instead of wood.
The sheriff probably didn't want the locals burning down the place in a drunken rage,
Prey thought. Gloom marched up to the door and found it locked. Not perturbed, he knocked loudly, horseshoe striking wood.
"It's the guard here on official business. Open up," he called.
There was a minute of silence as they stood on the street waiting. Gloom glanced back at them and knocked again, repeating his call slightly louder.
"It's the guard. Open up."
Nothing happened. Gloom was about to knock a third and final time before...
"Go find the mayor and demand access,"
when Prey's unbandaged right ear picked up the faint sound of movement from the other side of the brick wall. Then, as they came into range, he picked up their thoughts. Celestia, give me strength if you don't stop kicking my door.
"There's someone coming," he said.
Some pony. You sure? I don't hear any. Then there was a rattle of keys, followed by what might have been a muffled curse, and then the lock clicked and the door was pushed open. Yeah? Who's got the apples? Oh. The large green earth pony stallion on the other side of the door stopped midway through his demand as he caught sight of the royal guard armor. He squinted from under the battered-looking Stetson through bleary eyes. Wait, are you the guard? He asked gruffly.
Yes, the night guard. I'm Sergeant Gloom. Are you the sheriff of Haysteam?
Gloom asked. Yeah, I'm him. Turf Apple, the green stallion answered, a touch of uncertainty. He wore a crumpled and dusty jacket, a polished gold star badge on the collar. Dang it, why didn't any pony give me a heads up?
Excellent. Our business would be better discussed inside, Gloom said.
Turf Apple wavered on the doorstep for a second as he processed that. Oh, right. Come into my office then, he said awkwardly, stepping back. Gloom strode confidently into the sparse office, with Crimson close behind. The Pegasus jammed the door open with his hoof as Turf Apple automatically went to shut it. What? Turf Apple demanded. Crimson just gave him a level look and pushed the door back open enough to also admit Prey. The lamb didn't pass comment as he slipped inside, just gave the office a quick once-over for threats, before stepping smartly out of reach of the sheriff. Turf Apple was blinking and trying to come up with an explanation for what his eyes were seeing. What in tarnation is the lamb doing in here? Why are the guard carting around a sheep? You've got a lamb following you, Sergeant, he stated somewhat stupidly.
Yes, he's also part of the night guard. Where are the cells?
Gloom answered without looking back. He? I don't think you've seen enough sheep, Mr. Sergeant, but I've been a farmer and here's a baby ewe, Turf Apple said, apparently still bemusedly caught up on the fact that a lamb, of all people, had been escorted by the night guard into his office. Prey was starting to suspect that the sheriff might be slightly drunk.
No, he's a he. He's part of the night guard. No, I'm not making this up. His name is Prey. And now, where are the cells, Sheriff Turf Apple?
Gloom repeated. Cells? What are you wanting with the cells? Turf Apple asked, finally looking away from Prey, who was making a point of looking normal and harmless like he always did around strangers.
We are here to interrogate some of the ponies from the riot yesterday morning. It's my understanding that you have a number of them locked up here,
Gloom said, starting to get impatient. Oh, right, of course. Yes, they're down here, he said, jerking his head towards a door behind the desk.
Good. After you, Sheriff, if you would be so kind. You do have a secluded room for interviews and interrogations, yes?
Gloom asked, gesturing the sheriff to lead the way. Turf Apple dithered for a moment, then set his jaw and faced them squarely. What do you want with them? These here are suspects that are my responsibility, and I'm the sheriff of this here town. In here you do things my way, Turf Apple announced firmly. Neither Gloom or Crimson appeared fazed.
Sheriff, we are the night guard. We have jurisdiction in any investigation assigned to us by duly appointed officers, in whatever part of Equestria we're required to enter. Rest assured, we're here just to uphold the law, same as you. Now if you would kindly lead the way,
Gloom said politely, gesturing once again for Turf Apple to take the lead. You're not here to take any of them away, then? Turf Apple asked suspiciously. This here's their town of residence, and so I've got power to arrest them and hold them here for breaking the law, he insisted. Why the sheriff was even arguing about this raised a few questions in Prey's head, but he decided to save them until later.
Sheriff, the cells, please, Gloom repeated pleasantly. What's his problem? Why is there even a problem? He thought. We can discuss what action we take, if any, after we've spoken to a few of the suspects, he added out loud. Turf Apple finally did as he was asked, ducking his head so he could more firmly push his hat on and hide his muttered comment. Stomping over to the desk, he started shuffling through one of the drawers. Now where did Charcoal put the spare? Aha! Turf Apple pulled out a large key on a string and pulled open the door. This way, if you please, he muttered, not waiting to see if they followed him. Gloom's eyes flicked over to Crimson, and then Prey. Any thoughts? He mouthed. Crimson shook his head, and Prey shrugged and made a motion with his head that seemed to indicate, ask me later. Gloom shrugged himself, and went after Turf Apple. When Prey stepped around the desk to follow, he saw a mostly empty glass bottle propped underneath, a couple of inches of amber liquid still in the bottom.
So, he is slightly drunk then. I wasn't sure. Didn't smell anything on his breath,
Prey thought. The door they went through led down a short, dingy corridor to another 2 doors set at the end of the left and right. Turf Apple unlocked the right one with the key, and they were able to step through into a room with 4 barred cells, the area lit by sunlight from a line of small, high-set, dusty windows. The cells had brick walls between them, so that a prisoner couldn't see over into the next cell, but could see out the front just fine. All of the cells were occupied, 2 ponies in each cell, in various attitudes of boredom or despondency. A couple looked up as Turf Apple came in, and then jerked upright as Gloom stepped inside in his night guard armor, followed by Crimson. As usual, few noticed Prey slipping in quietly behind them. Quickly, Prey scanned the cell's inhabitants, looking for anything out of place and trying to sift through the jumble of thoughts that came from being in the same room as 11 other individuals. Oh, horse! Feathers, the guard! Why didn't I listen to Mark? Stay calm. I'm innocent! Prey's breath caught in his throat as he spotted a blue unicorn in the last cell. The unicorn wasn't chained or bound in any way, the horn on his head free and uninhibited. Prey could not process the stupidity of imprisoning a unicorn without taking such basic safety precautions.
Why hasn't he escaped? Is fear of the sheriff really the only thing keeping him in here?
Prey thought in horror, backing towards the door. I'm Sergeant Gloom of the Night Guard, here on behalf of the Canterlot Crown, Gloom announced loudly, standing proudly as he surveyed the inmates watching him with wide eyes. I have a few questions that I'm going to be asking some of you. Answering them truthfully will only help your case. Some of the ponies' eyes darted to Turf Apple, who made an imperceptible motion with his head. Prey, however, heard their thoughts loud and clear. What's going to happen to me? Turf won't let them take me away. And then Turf Apple, don't worry. I'm not letting any 2-bit god get between my family. Sheriff Turf Apple, I would like to make use of that interrogation room you spoke of. We'll be taking them in one at a time. Now hold on, Turf Apple interrupted. I'm the sheriff, and I demand to be in on any interrogation you fellas carry out. It's my duty to protect the rights of every pony. The angry annoyance coming off Gloom at the town sheriff for showing them up was almost palpable. Once again, Prey was flabbergasted by Turf Apple's blatant stupidity.
You don't contradict the guard, especially not in front of any prisoners. You at least pretend present and unified front. Never show weakness. The stallion is a complete fool,
Prey thought from where he hid. Currently, Prey was observing the proceedings from outside the room, only his head poking around the doorframe, keeping well away from the blue unicorn, who looked like he was trying not to cry. Of course, Sheriff Turf Apple, your input would be welcome, Gloom ground out. Now, however might not be the time. I ain't going nowhere, Turf Apple insisted stubbornly, glaring at Gloom and Crimson. Wait, what about? A large, slightly banged-up-looking earth pony mare in one of the cells started, before she was cut off by Turf Apple snapping at her. Quiet, Honeybush, I'm dealing with this. The mare called Honeybush snapped her mouth shut and shrank back into one of the cells, eyes glued to the floor. Prey caught a flash of guilt in Turf Apple's thoughts, before it turned to anger. The sheriff snorted and glowered back at Gloom, who returned the glare for glare. Sheriff, a suspect in the interrogation room? Now, if you would be so kind, Gloom asked in an overly polite tone, which didn't match at all with his expression. Turf Apple didn't budge.
I ain't letting any pony out of my sight while they're under my jurisdiction. Either come back with a custody transfer order, or I get to sit in. Crimson moved ever so slightly closer to Gloom, shifting his center of gravity and losing his folded wings. It wasn't much, just a small shift in stance, but Prey recognized it for what it was. Crimson had gone from passive observer to ready warrior. He wasn't the only one to notice.
Crimson, that's not what we're here for,
Gloom said in a low voice, not breaking eye contact with the stubborn sheriff. Turf Apple seemed oblivious to the fact that he was only one wrong move away from a fight. I'm the one you're talking to here, so what's it going to be? My terms or no terms? Turf Apple pressed. Prey shot a look at the prisoners. Their attitude of worry had shifted towards nervous hope, although they still seemed very concerned about what the Night Guard were here to do. A couple more so than others. Honeybush was one of them, along with a yellow Pegasus and a brown and white dappled earth pony in the adjacent cell.
Those three definitely have something to hide.
Gloom gritted his teeth, struggling to fix a smile to his face.
Yes, Sheriff, of course. How could I refuse such a gracious request? You're doing your duty in upholding the princess's law, after all. Same as us,
he gritted out. Prey thought it was a good job the Dusk pony's amulet glamour hid the Thestral pony's canines, or else that smile would have crossed the line from forced to outright threatening. Turf Apple glared at them suspiciously for a last few long seconds. Good. The interrogation room turned out to be the only other room in the hallway, the one on the left. It looked more like it had been used for an impromptu kitchen or break room, what with the messy sink in the corner, half full of used plates and mugs. Gloom hastily cleared the table, pushing most of the junk on it to the floor, getting a filthy look from Turf Apple, which he ignored. Crimson dragged up 2 chairs, one on each side of the table, and took up position behind the far one where Gloom would be sitting.
Sheriff, if you would be so good as to fetch the first suspect. The sooner we start, the sooner we can all get out of here,
Gloom said, taking the chair. Best not waste any time, then, Turf Apple snorted sarcastically.
Couldn't have said it any better myself, Sheriff Turf Apple,
Gloom returned. Once the green earth stallion had left the room to fetch the first prisoner, it seemed to dawn on Gloom that he'd lost track of the third member of their party.
Where's Prey?
He asked sharply, standing back up.
How'd I forget?
He's here.
I'm right here,
both Crimson and Prey answered at the same time. Gloom swiveled to pinpoint where his ears had heard the lamb's voice.
How'd you get there? I didn't even see you. I was right behind you. Not my fault if you didn't see me.
He was already waiting in the corridor when we came out, sir, Crimson said.
He was?
Gloom blinked, then to Prey.
You were? Obviously. Now, before Turf Apple returns, listen. The sheriff is trying to cover for one of the prisoners. Not sure why, but my guess is that they're blood related. Cousins, maybe. Possibly that Honeybush?
Prey suggested. Gloom didn't question how Prey had come to that conclusion, and just nodded seriously, obviously figuring that he must have noticed something I missed. Gloom was correct. Prey had noticed something the sergeant had missed. Namely, their inner thoughts.
Anything else?
Quickly, Gloom asked in a low voice, eyes on the door. Prey shrugged.
Turf Apple might also be slightly drunk. Not sure if that's important.
Drunk? Drinking while on duty is a serious dereliction of... The door reopened and Gloom snapped back to sitting up straight in the chair, a look of bored professionalism in his face as Turf Apple entered. Leading in the same brown dappled earth pony from before, with a pair of fairly loose cuffs attached to his front legs. He was also sporting a large, hoof-shaped bruise on his chest that looked a day old, and a dust-matted mane from yesterday's riot.
Good. This was one of the guilty ones I picked out earlier,
Prey thought. He didn't care about stopping these riots, just like he didn't care about helping Tulip or Rocky Bed. However, he was here to prove that he was useful to Luna and wasn't replaceable. Nervously, the Earth Pony took the other seat when Turf Apple told him to, eyes flicking back and forth between Gloom and Crimson, who were watching him dispassionately. Or Gloom was. That was just Crimson's default expression. Horse apples. Okay, keep calm, don't panic. They can't prove anything, the prisoner thought, taking a deep breath. Name? Gloom asked abruptly. The Earth Pony started. I'm Pot, he answered, trying not to look Gloom in the eye. Even with the dusk amulet masking his normal slit pupils, the glaring yellow of the disguised Thestral's eyes still gave them an unnatural intensity.
Full name, please.
I mean, Willow Pot.
The cuffed pony hurriedly corrected himself.
Age? 30. 31 next month,
Willowpot answered.
Job or occupation?
Gloom asked next.
I don't have one at the moment, but I used to work in the lumber yard.
Where? There's no forestry grounds here, Gloom asked without missing a beat.
Down in Top Town. I'd catch the train down there 4 days a week for work,
Willowpot explained, shifting his cuffed hooves about uncomfortably on the table. There were mug ring stains on the wood. Household status? Gloom asked.
I don't know what you mean by that.
Who do you live with? Where do you live? Marriage status or children?
No, I'm not married. I'm still living with my parents on 2nd Street,
Willowpot said, looking down.
Thank you for confirming your details. Now, if you don't mind, we'd like to talk to you about the incident yesterday morning. I assume you know the incident I'm talking about,
Gloom asked him.
Yes,
Willowpot mumbled, sinking lower in his chair.
Then I also assume you know why you're here,
Gloom stated. He's here because he's a suspect, not because he's been convicted of anything, Turfapple interjected, standing behind Willowpot to back him up in much the same way Crimson was standing behind Gloom. When did this become a standoff? Gloom thought. Willowpot glanced up at Turfapple, perhaps looking for some confirmation of reassurance. However, despite what he just said to Gloom, the sheriff didn't make any motion to do as Willowpot obviously hoped.
Willowpot,
Gloom said, recapturing his attention,
I would like you to explain, in your own words, what both happened yesterday and why you've been arrested.
Held for questioning, not arrested, Turfapple butted in. Gloom took a moment to breathe.
Willowpot, please answer the question,
he said. Willowpot looked up once more to Turfapple, but again failed to spot the reassurance he was looking for. He seemed to deflate even further and spoke to the table.
I'm here because I got involved in the fight. When Yellowturn upended Fence's cop because of what Grapefruit said last week to Yellowturn and his sister. Then from last month's riot, Cheese and Onion's son happened to pay the hospital bill when it wasn't their fault. Ann and I had to try to stand up for my cousin with my friends. And next thing I know, Fence is kicking in Yellowturn's own cart. And then Coco kicked the back of accounts for him supporting Mistletoe.
Gloom brought Willowpot's breathless ramblings to an end by bringing his hoof down loudly on the table, making Willow flinch and Turfapple scowl. The spiel Willowpot had been mindlessly spouting held almost nothing of value and had been difficult to follow.
Focus on the key points,
Prey thought, listening closely.
Yellowturn, last month's riot, resentment still simmering. Hospital bills and who was hospitalized? Willowpot, none of that really answers the question. Why were you arrested and who started it?
Gloom asked slowly, punctuating each word clearly. No pony started the riot. No one any more than any pony else. Every pony is equally guilty on this one, Turfapple said, putting a hoof on Willowpot's shoulder before the hoof-scuffed pony could answer.
Sheriff Turfapple,
Gloom began angrily, and Crimson's wings twitched.
A name! One name of who started the riot.
The childish voice brought all of them to a stop, as the ponies looked down in surprise at Prey, who had spoken.
Give us one name,
Prey repeated.
Sheriff? Why is she here? This lamb, I mean.
Willowpot asked in bewilderment. Don't have a clue. Gloom here seems to think she's part of some night guard division or something special, Turfapple answered, his tone barely above scornful. He also made special attention in stressing Gloom's name without attaching the title.
A name,
Prey repeated once more.
Just tell us a name.
Willowpot just blinked at him, then looked at Turfapple, as if searching for an answer of what was going on. You aren't obligated to answer that. She's just a lamb, not a guard, Turfapple said. Prey let out a heavy, put-upon sigh, rolling his big blue eyes and making an exaggerated shrug.
Oh, well, I tried to be polite. Guess we're doing this the hard way then,
he said, eyes creasing shut as he smiled sweetly. He looked as intimidating as a feather pillow right then, and everyone's thoughts present told him as much. Lamb trying to impress. How funny. Do her parents know what she is?
Kid, what are you just doing?
And then, an actual surprise for Prey. Crimson's mental wall shifted,
and for a few scant seconds the Pegasus's thoughts were uncovered. Prey picked up just 3 words. Big bunny rabbit. And then the walls closed again. Huh. Unexpected. But that could be considered later. Right now, Prey had some ponies to manipulate.
Sheriff Turpapple, I'd like you to consider my words. Just for a moment, please,
Prey said, the sweet smile still in place.
What do you think happens if we think you're lying to us,
Turf Apple shook off the effects of cloying innocence and managed to scowl at Prey. Well, I ain't lying about whatever thing you think it is, lamb, so it don't matter.
Oh, please, Sheriff Turfapple,
Prey said, throwing in a childish giggle.
But of course you're lying. Didn't you know that Sergeant Gloom's special talent is being able to spot when someone is lying?
Prey asked, then slapped a hoof over his mouth and glanced anxiously at Gloom.
Oops! I wasn't supposed to let that slip yet,
he said, feigning chagrin. What are you doing, kid? I don't have that talent. Gloom's thoughts raced, but he managed to keep up his cool facade, merely giving Prey a chastising look like Prey really had let something slip. Crimson was just watching everything with a slightly nonplussed expression, although you had to look really close to see it.
Oh well, the Manticore's out of the bag now, Prey shrugged carelessly. I guess you know lying is pointless now. I mean, before you came back in, Sergeant Gloom had already knew you'd tried to lie and cover for some of the prisoners because they're family, like Honeybush. He told us to keep it quiet about how you were trying to use your authority to keep custody of them so no one else could prosecute them, because he wanted to give you enough rope to hang yourself with. And also about the mare and the cider bottle and your brother's farm and...
Prey deflated.
And I did it again.
Cringing, he looked up at Gloom.
Sorry, sir. I let it slip again.
He apologized, ears drooping. Turf Apple was speechless. How did he know that stuff? Thank you, Prey, but that's quite enough now, Gloom said. Inside, the sergeant was panicking, just slightly. What are you talking about? I haven't a clue what game you're playing. Obviously, Gloom worked out that Prey was trying to unsettle these two enough to make them slip up, but he didn't know where to go from here without revealing that it was all a bluff. Threw me in the deep end here, kid. At least Prey's little act had worked, making it worth the humiliation. Turf Apple tried, and actually did a fairly good job in hiding his shock, but it was too late, and they'd seen him flinch. While Willow Pot didn't quite know the importance of everything Prey had just said, he too was starting to panic because it sounded like he was getting into even more trouble. What do you think you're trying to...
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have been in the fight. I swear it won't happen again, sir. What have I got to do to prove I'm innocent?
Willowprop blurted out.
Excellent. Now let's see if Gloom knows how to capitalize on an advantage,
Prey thought, sitting back in the corner, his work done.
Since you're feeling a little more cooperative now, how about you answer my original question? Who started the riot?
Gloom demanded sternly.
And please, don't bother lying. I'll be asking the other suspects the same question, and if I get different answers, there's gonna be trouble.
What? The sheriff started.
But they might not know, and they'll tell you it was some pony else.
Willowpop protested fearfully.
Then you best be the one telling the truth. So go on, give us a name, Gloom said.
Hold on, Turf Apple tried.
But I don't know either. It might have been Yellow Turn or Fence or Scrappy Date or maybe Timmy Tommy. I just don't know, I'm sorry,
Willowpot said.
That's good enough for now, Chef Turf Apple,
Gloom said, turning his hard eyes on the green earth pony.
Are any of those named individuals among those being held in the cells?
No, Turf Apple stated, then remembers Prey's assertion about Gloom's lie detection capabilities, and they could just go back and ask for themselves anyway. Yes, he answered grudgingly.
Good. Take Willowpot.
Gloom almost waved a wing towards the nervous prisoner, but at the last second remembered to do it with his hoof instead.
Back to his cell and bring one of those ponies in, please,
he added with a polite grin that held no warmth. Prey could hear Turf Apple's thoughts racing, but there wasn't anything the sheriff could do. Wordlessly, he helped Willowpot to his hooves and half led, half dragged him from the room. Gloom waited for the door to close behind them before swiveling in his chair to face Prey. He raised one hoof to forestall any comment. He closed and rubbed his eyes with the other hoof.
Okay, I'm not going to ask why, he sighed. It's pretty obvious why you did that. If a bit creepy seeing you act like, well, a fool. But a little warning next time, please. I was not planning on doing that. I was merely improvising,
Prey explained nonchalantly. I guess it worked this time, but what if they called the bluff? I can't actually catch lies, Gloom pointed out.
Is that how your talent works? You say you can tell when something's right or wrong. That sounds like the same thing,
Prey said innocently. No, I already explained this. My cutie mark lets me know if I'm following the right track, or path, or whatever will get me to the correct thing or decision. Sometimes it doesn't say anything. It's not like it says, yes, this way, or nah, not this way, Gloom said, rotating a hoof in the air as he tried to correctly verbalize what he had in his head. It's more like getting warmer or colder, but I don't always know to what, and sometimes it's for stuff I don't even know what I'm looking for, and it doesn't even tell me what I've found whenever it is either. This was the second time Prey had heard the explanation, and it was just as vague as last time, but it confirmed what he wanted to know.
Gloom can't tell when I'm lying, only when something in his subconscious raises a flag, nor does it speak to him in absolutes. He has to interpret it.
This was good. That was one more pressing worry off Prey's shoulders. That still left discovery by Luna and the possible sheep doll message to worry about. Sir, Turf Apple isn't coming straight back. I think he's gone back into the office to do something dishonest, Crimson said, grabbing their attention. You sure, Crimson? Gloom asked, all business again. Yes, sir. He went past the door. I heard the floorboard squeak, Crimson replied. Prey had been distracted and hadn't heard anything. Or maybe it was because he had only one full working ear at the moment.
That's no excuse. Would have been a raiding party at the door,
Prey berated himself. Crimson, Gloom began, half raising and looking towards the door. He didn't need to finish his order. Crimson was already moving, pulling the door open and almost flowing out in one motion. Prey heard a muffled exclamation of surprise down the corridor in the sheriff's gruff voice. What were you doing? Prey heard Crimson ask flatly. Ain't none of your business, Turf Apple snapped. Prey stepped aside as Gloom overtook him on the way to the door, stepping out ahead of him into the corridor. Sheriff Turf Apple, we are in the middle of an investigation. What was so important that it could not wait? Gloom demanded. Prey stuck his head out the door. Down the corridor in the office, Crimson was blocking Turf Apple's route to the front door, while the sheriff looked a mix between worried and angry. Ain't none of your business! It's a personal matter, Turf Apple repeated, not budging in his denial. Sheriff, I'm sure we're all on the same page when I say that explanation just isn't gonna fly right now, Gloom said mockingly. Either tell me the truth, or I'll have you detained for obstructing our investigation. Turf Apple glowered from under the brim of his hat. It's a personal matter, but if you must know, I was sending a message to my brother, not that it's any of your business, he defended. A message to your brother? Gloom repeated flatly. That's what I said, Turf Apple snorted. In the middle of an investigation, after the suspect gave us names, after we instructed you to go fetch them from the cells, just across the hall. And you needed to send a message to family right then? Gloom stated in obvious skepticism. Turf Apple didn't answer. Prey didn't know what was currently running through the sheriff's head, as where he stood at the end of the corridor was out of Prey's perception range, but it wasn't hard to guess.
Caught red-hoofed and still trying to bluster his way out of it. The only question now is, who did he send the message to?
Who did you send? Gloom asked. I don't like your tone there. Then answer the question. Who did you send the message with? Gloom repeated. Turf Apple snorted. My personal business is my own, and has no bearing on your investigation, so it ain't my duty to answer none. So you can just keep on wondering, he said, making to shove past Crimson and walk back down the corridor. Crimson easily sidestepped and smacked Turf Apple back with a wing. It wasn't a hard or fast smack, more of a firm push against the sheriff's side as he was lifting his leg to step. Turf Apple was forced to stumble backwards or overbalance. Considering just how strong a Pegasi's wings were, and despite the sheriff being a large earth pony, Crimson could have probably knocked Turf Apple flat on his tail if he'd wanted to, especially with his strange form of martial arts training. Instead, all Crimson had done was stop the stallion from moving past him. Turf Apple blinked, then frowned and tried again. Exactly the same thing happened. Crimson moved aside and with a firm buffet of his wing, forced Turf Apple to step back into his original position. It looked almost like Crimson was scolding him,
like a Pegasus mother might buffet her disobedient child. Now Turf Apple was getting angry and glared at Crimson's neutral expression. I'm warning ya, don't try that again. This here is my station, and I'll go wherever I darn well please, he said. Crimson didn't respond to him at all, just swiveled an ear back towards where Gloom stood in the corner. Sir? He asked. Sheriff, Gloom began seriously, I hope we don't need to explain just how suspicious this looks from our perspective. I think you'd best explain your actions, or we'll be forced to jump to our own conclusions, he told him. Prey could hear that Gloom already knew that Turf Apple's just gonna lie again, and then I'll be forced to do something I'd rather not, and I've already dealt with enough horse apples for one day. Why do things have to be so complicated? He thought in exasperation. Turf Apple fixed his hat more firmly on his head, looking like he was getting ready to charge. For the last time, it ain't any of your royal god business what I says to my family, and you ain't got any power to make me. Prey was seriously tempted to sit back and let it come to blows. He was very interested in what Gloom would do when pushed and just how effective Crimson's moves were. In the span of a single breath, Prey weighed up the pros and cons, and, regretfully, decided that it wasn't a worthy enough use of his time. Right as Gloom opened his muzzle to give Crimson the order to do what? The sergeant hadn't decided, but something, Prey said loudly,
Oh, wait, I know! You were just about to tell us how it isn't any of our business about the warning you sent to your brother's farm just now.
What? I did not!
Who did you send it with? Someone who must have been nearby. In fact, they must have been waiting near this jail. What did you tell them to say? To hide or destroy any evidence?
Prey said, posing one question after another, not giving anyone else a chance to speak as he pressed ahead, eyes intently watching every telltale twitch Turf Apple made.
What evidence would there even be to hide? Stolen goods? Money? A bribe, if that's the case? No, how about one of those wagons?
Prey pressed. The Tartarus, you!
Ah, I see. Not something, but someone. One of the instigators of the riot, no? Yes. Yes it is, I see. And you want them protected. Why? Do you owe them? No, it's because they're family. Ah, that's it. Like Honeybush. Why, though? What are you protecting them from?
Prey asked, then rapped his hoof against the floorboards as the answer came to him.
Oh, I see. It's who you're protecting them from. Honeybush and some of your cousins are locked in here, away from the ponies out there. Am I right, aren't I? No, don't deny it! I see now. Those riots have your family split down the middle. You're trying to keep them apart. You'll do anything to protect your family, yeah? What kind of Stelly wouldn't? I know how it goes. Loyalty to family above all else.
Prey grinned hungrily at Turf Apple as he picked him apart, the sheriff only able to gape soundlessly.
But you're being pulled both ways, aren't you, Turf Apple? You don't know which side of your family to take. Oh, but they each want you to pick them. You're the law in this town, aren't you? Very proud of the sheriff in the family. So you're not picking, just trying to keep everyone happy. So, who are you trying to keep happy on your brother's farm?
Prey took an aggressive step forwards, almost without realizing it.
Who's there? Who's so important? Who would be in trouble if we found out? Who would those other suspects in the cell have named if we asked? Who would have we found at your brother's farm if you hadn't sent the message? Who? Who?
Prey almost squeaked excitedly, mind fully engaged in the job of digging out everything that Turf Apple was trying to hide. The sound of his own high-pitched voice that so annoyed him broke Prey's focus, reminding him of who was present and that perhaps he was saying too much. He'd never really had to worry about who might hear more than they were supposed to before. He'd always been alone.
Please excuse me. I'll just be quiet now,
Prey said, stepping back and ducking his head, but not before he sent a nasty grin Turf Apple's way.
I think I've said enough already,
he added smugly. The speechless Turf Apple flinched. Although Crimson and Gloom were giving Prey weird looks, they knew Prey, so they weren't nearly as surprised at the trick he'd just pulled. I don't think there's any point in trying to hide the truth now, Turf Apple, so why don't you just come clean and tell us? Gloom said, tone collected and in command once again. You told the lamb to... Turf Apple stumbled. Prey is a member of the Princess Luna's night guard. You'll do well not to forget it. Now tell me, last chance, who did you send the warning to? Turf Apple looked at Prey, who was grinning nastily at him. Then at Gloom, who was waiting, then at Crimson, who stood ready to stop him, and then back to Gloom again. His shoulders slumped and his broad chest seemed to deflate, his jacket going slack with gold star dangling off of it. The hat covered his eyes as he looked at the ground. "It ain't any of your business," Turf Apple mumbled. "I know you're going to find out anyways, but I can't tell you. I can't turn my back on family," he said in defeat.
"Is that your final say, Sheriff?"
Gloom asked calmly. "Yeah." Gloom didn't say anything further as he looked at the green earth pony, who seemed to have resigned himself to waiting for his fate. The silence stretched. It would have made a very dramatic scene for anyone watching, but since Prey could hear what Gloom was really thinking, he could have debunked any such foolish notions. Because internally, the sergeant was panicking. Gloom didn't know how to proceed. His instincts and also his duty were to detain Turf Apple, but that just raised a whole host of problems. First, he had nowhere to hold Turf Apple. He was the sheriff. There wasn't someone else who he could hoof off custody to. And what about the other suspects in the cells? Who would watch and look after them if they arrested and took Turf Apple back to Canterlot with them on the train? He couldn't very well just release them all.
Hang on, I'll remember. This town recently got a telegram tower installed, didn't it? Order them to send one back to Canterlot and get... Wait, Moonblight, that's right. The telegram tower was knocked out of commission by the riot,
Gloom thought, team clenching together in frustration. And that didn't solve the problem of who this pony was that Turf Apple had sent the warning to either. They couldn't just ignore that, and if they detained Turf Apple, they wouldn't be able to go after whomever it was. And for that matter, who was going to oversee law in Haysteam until they returned to Canterlot and reported the situation? The fact of the matter was that arresting Turf Apple created far more problems than it solved, but neither could they just let him go. He was a lawbreaker, impeding an important investigation into serious civil unrest, and who knew what else he'd been turning a blind eye to when it involved his family.
What do I choose? Crimson and Prey are looking at me here. I've got to choose correctly.
And then it came to him. Prey could hear the relief in Gloom's thoughts as a possible course of action presented itself, and a sudden feeling of rightness from Sergeant Cutie Mark seemed to confirm it.
"Sheriff Turf Apple," Gloom announced, "as a sergeant in the Night Guard and by special powers of my division, I revoke your authority as sheriff and order you to surrender yourself into our custody until such time as a fair trial can be held," he told the silent stallion.
Prey knew that Gloom was skipping the proper forms of arrest. He hadn't given him his rights or said why he was arresting Turf Apple. Turf Apple pulled his gold star off his jacket and tossed it at Gloom's hooves. "There. Never brought nothing but trouble to me," he muttered.
"Good. Now, where's the registry for the ponies in the cells?" Gloom asked.
Turf Apple didn't respond.
Gloom sighed. "Crimson, start looking through the office for it. It's got to be in here somewhere," he ordered.
Crimson moved to obey, but Turf Apple spoke up.
"There ain't one.
I didn't want nothing recorded on my family," the ex-sheriff said. Gloom hissed in disdain.
"By the way, sir, the longer we wait, the further away the messenger gets,"
Prey said quietly.
"That's a moot point by now. It's too late to catch him in time,"
Gloom muttered back. When he next spoke, it was at a normal volume so everyone could hear.
"Crimson, stay here with Turf Apple. I will be 5 minutes. I've got to speak to the other suspects."
Quickly, Gloom trotted up the corridor to the desk, grabbed a sheet of paper and a pencil, then back to Prey and the door to the cells. The key was still in the lock, and Gloom snagged it as he entered. Prey followed him to see what he was going to do. All the inmates in the cells froze as Gloom entered. Willowpot, who was also back in his cell, came to a sputteringly halt midway through telling the rest of the listening prisoners about the scary night guard captain's full-napped a lamb, and the horrified look on his cellmate's face made Willowpot turn around and freeze. Gloom gave the quivering stallion an unimpressed look, before addressing the rest of the room's similarly frozen occupants.
"One at a time. I want you to give me your name, age, address. This is not a request, understood?"
Gloom ordered. His tone brooked no protest. When he got no answer, he repeated himself louder.
"I said, am I understood?"
The inmates snapped out of their silent stupor enough to give a smattering of yes, yes, sir, and even an aye, aye.
"Good."
Turning, Gloom pushed the paper and pencil across to Prey.
"Here, write their answers down,"
he ordered. Prey thought it was pointless. As anything he heard, he could repeat back exactly. But he was following his own advice from earlier, and so did as he was told, rather than weaken their image in front of all of these prisoners. Nervously, his eyes darted to the unicorn in the end cell as he picked up the pencil.
Name, age, address,
Gloom said, pointing to a dark purple earth pony mare in the first cell, who cowered when Gloom turned to her.
Really?
Prey thought with scorn.
He's not even that visually intimidating, especially with that dust pony amulet on.
Speak! Gloom barked when the mare just started to stutter uselessly, all patience gone.
Bread pudding? I'm 28. I live at 17 Happy Street,
she managed to force out. Good. Next, Gloom said, looking to the next pony in the cell. Quickly, the round of names, ages, and addresses being taken from the assembled ponies was completed. Bray hadn't managed to get much of it down on the paper, because Gloom had been asking too fast, but it didn't matter. He'd remember. Gloom finished up with the last pony and strode back to the center of the room, where all the occupants of the cell could see him.
Listen up, every pony, because here's what's going to happen. And you best pay close attention, as this is going to affect your immediate future, he announced. As of right now, I'm releasing you all on bail.
All of the ponies stared at the night guard sergeant.
What?
Someone faintly asked.
You are to be released on bail, Gloom repeated. However,
he growled before anyone could start celebrating,
make no mistake, you are still very much in trouble, but that can wait until the proper trial. Any actions you take between now and then will have an enormous impact on your hearing. And there will be a hearing. You can bet your tail on it. We have your names, faces, age, cutie marks, and addresses.
Gloom paused to give them a hard, yellow stare.
So to any pony thinking of slipping out, you might want to carefully reconsider your ill-advised plan. Right now, the charges against you aren't too serious. However, if you want to upgrade that to outlaw status and to be hounded across Equestria by the guard, feel free. The punishment for outlaws is a 2-year sentence. Minimum.
That seemed to properly cow the inmates to Gloom's satisfaction, because he nodded firmly once to let them all know he'd made his point. Then he walked up and unlocked the closest cell door.
Let every pony else out,
he ordered, tossing the key to one of the 2 apprehensive earth ponies inside. He raised his voice.
And remember what I said. For your own good and the good of your loved ones, don't do anything stupid.
Spinning on his back hooves, Gloom marched for the door. Come on, Prey. We've got a pony to find. Down the end of the corridor in the office, Crimson was standing watch over the former sheriff right where they'd left him.
Sir?
No time. We've got a troublemaker to find. Talk as we go.
Gloom glanced at Turf Apple. Get out of here. The Royal Guard will be here in the morning. Don't make this any hotter than it needs to be, he said as he headed for the door.
That was not how I would have gone about securing the prisoners. I would have left them in those cells, especially with an unbound unicorn in there. Far too dangerous to get close. And I would have either killed or mind-wiped Turf Apple,
Prey thought, then groaned as he realized Gloom and Crimson were going to leave him behind again. Breaking into an ungainly run on his tired hooves, Prey dashed past the slumped Turf Apple. He caught a quick read of the depressed ex-sheriff's thoughts as he went. Well, nothing for it, old colt. Hope the bar's open right now.
Serves you right for getting caught,
Prey thought. Ahead, Gloom and Crimson were still accelerating. Damn.
I hate being a runt.